The rain was coming down hard on the Portland State University campus that October evening, when I discovered my entire life had been built on a lie. I was walking back from my night shift at the campus IT help desk, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, when I spotted Jessica's silhouette through the steamed windows of the Grind coffee shop. She was supposed to be studying for her marketing midterm, but instead, she was leaning across a corner table, fingers intertwined with Tyler Brooks, the golden boy of our business program. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What made my stomach drop wasn't just seeing them together. It was watching Jessica slide a small silver key across the table to Tyler. The same key I'd given her 3 months ago. The key to my apartment, but more importantly, the key to the office space I'd been secretly renting downtown. The space where I'd been building something that could change both our futures forever. Tyler picked up the key, examined it with that smug smile he always wore during presentations, and slipped it into his designer jacket pocket. Then Jessica did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled out her phone, opened what looked like a file-sharing app, and showed Tyler the screen. Even from outside in the rain, I could see his eyes light up as he scrolled through whatever she was sharing. The whole thing started 6 months earlier when Jessica and I had been together for almost 2 years. We were both seniors, and everyone said we were the perfect couple. She was studying marketing with dreams of working for a major brand, and I was double majoring in computer science and business. To everyone around us, I was just another broke college student working multiple part-time jobs to pay for school. I did tech support for the university, tutored struggling students in programming, and spent weekends fixing computers for anyone willing to pay $20 an hour. What they didn't know was that those weren't just random jobs. Every computer I fixed, every network I troubleshot, every small business I helped set up their systems. I was building something much bigger. My father had started Mitchell Tech Solutions 25 years ago, back when most people thought the internet was a fad. What began as a one-man operation fixing computers in our garage had quietly grown into one of the most trusted IT consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. Dad had always been careful about keeping a low profile. Our client list included half the major businesses in Portland, from boutique law firms to growing startups that would later become household names. But you'd never know it from looking at our modest storefront or our deliberately understated marketing. Dad believed in letting our work speak for itself, and it had spoken loudly enough to generate millions in revenue over the years. The plan was always for me to take over after graduation. Not immediately, of course. Dad wanted me to earn my stripes, maybe work for another company for a few years first, really understand the business from the ground up. But he'd been grooming me for leadership since I was 14, teaching me not just the technical side, but the relationship management, the strategic thinking, the careful balance between innovation and reliability that had made Mitchell Tech successful. Jessica knew I came from a business family, but I'd always downplayed it. When she asked about my parents, I'd say my dad ran a small computer repair shop, and my mom handled the books. Technically true, but missing about 90% of the story. I wasn't trying to deceive her exactly, but I'd learned the hard way. That money changed how people saw you, and I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what my family had built. The key I'd given Jessica wasn't just to my apartment. 3 months ago, Dad had surprised me by leasing a small office space in downtown Portland's emerging tech district. It was supposed to be my graduation gift, a place where I could start building my own client base before officially joining the family business. The office came with high-end equipment, blazing fast internet, and access to all of Mitchell Tech's enterprise software licenses. It was my laboratory, my proving ground, and eventually it would become the foundation of my own consulting practice. I'd been working on something special there, a proprietary project management system specifically designed for small IT consulting firms. The software would integrate client management, project tracking, billing, and technical documentation in a way that nothing on the market currently did. I'd been developing it for 8 months, putting in countless late nights after my regular jobs, fueled by energy drinks, and the vision of creating something that could revolutionize how small tech businesses operated. Jessica had been my biggest cheerleader throughout the process. She'd bring me coffee during late coding sessions, listen to me explain technical challenges even when I knew she didn't fully understand them, and constantly remind me how proud she was of my ambition. When I finally decided to show her the office space, she'd been amazed by the setup. That's when I'd made the mistake of giving her the key, telling her she was welcome any time, that this space represented our future together. She'd started spending more time there, especially during finals week when the campus libraries were overcrowded. I loved having her around while I worked. She'd study for her courses while I coded, and we'd take breaks together, talking about our dreams and how this software could be the first step toward building something amazing together. She even started offering marketing advice, suggesting features that would appeal to potential customers, and helping me think through the business model. That's what made seeing her with Tyler so devastating. This wasn't just about infidelity, though. That was crushing enough. This was about betrayal at the deepest level. A violation of trust that reached into the very core of everything I'd been working toward. Tyler Brooks was everything I appeared not to be. His father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across Oregon and Washington, and Tyler made sure everyone knew it. He drove a BMW M3 to campus, wore expensive clothes, and talked constantly about the startup he was planning to launch after graduation. He was the kind of guy who name-dropped Silicon Valley entrepreneurs in casual conversation and attended every networking event within 100 miles of Portland. Jessica had always insisted she wasn't impressed by Tyler's obvious wealth, that she valued substance over flash. She'd roll her eyes when he'd interrupt professor lectures to share some business insight he'd gained from his father's connections, or when he'd throw expensive parties at his downtown loft apartment. But I'd noticed how she'd listen just a little too intently when Tyler talked about his post-graduation plans, how she'd ask follow-up questions about his family's business empire. Over the past month, I'd started noticing changes in Jessica's behavior. She was spending less time at my apartment, and more time claiming she needed to study alone. She'd become protective of her phone, angling it away from me when she texted. Most concerning, she'd started asking detailed questions about my software project. Questions that went beyond casual interest into areas that felt uncomfortably specific. Last week, she'd asked for my login credentials to the development server, claiming she wanted to write a case study about my project for one of her marketing classes. Something about it felt off, but I trusted her completely. I gave her read-only access, thinking it would be sweet for her to write about my work. Now, standing in the rain watching her share something on her phone with Tyler, I had a sinking feeling about what that case study might actually have been for. The rational part of my brain wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for this meeting. Maybe she was getting Tyler's advice about something unrelated to my business. Maybe I was letting my insecurities and the stress of senior year make me paranoid about nothing. But then I saw Tyler pull out his own laptop, and Jessica scooted her chair around to his side of the table. They spent the next 20 minutes looking at his screen together, Jessica pointing at various elements while Tyler typed and nodded. Whatever they were working on, it was clearly collaborative, detailed, and required Jessica's specific input. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jessica. "Hey babe, study group running late tonight. Don't wait up for me. Love you." The lie hit me like a physical blow. Study group. Right. I watched through the window as Tyler closed his laptop and reached across the table to squeeze Jessica's hand. She smiled at him in a way that made my chest tighten, then gathered her things. They left the coffee shop together, walking in the direction of Tyler's downtown apartment building. I stood in the rain for another 10 minutes, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Part of me wanted to follow them, to confront whatever was happening directly. But a larger part of me, the part that had learned patience and strategic thinking, from years of watching my father build his business, told me to wait. If Jessica was betraying me, I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I acted. I walked home to my apartment, the same modest 2-bedroom place I'd been renting since junior year. Jessica had a key, of course, and most of her stuff was scattered around the living room from the nights she stayed over. Her marketing textbooks were stacked on my coffee table, her favorite mug was in my kitchen sink, and her spare phone charger was plugged in next to my bed. All the small signs of a relationship that I'd thought was heading toward something permanent. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop and logged into the development server for my software project. Everything looked normal at first glance, but as I dug deeper into the access logs, my worst fears were confirmed. Jessica hadn't just been reading about my project for some innocent case study. She'd been systematically downloading files, documentation, and code samples for the past 3 weeks. The logs showed she'd accessed my business plan, my technical specifications, my customer research, and most damaging of all, my source code. Someone with Jessica's marketing background wouldn't need source code for a case study. But someone planning to steal my idea and build their own competing version would need exactly these files. I spent the next 2 hours going through every access log, every file download, every timestamp. The pattern was clear and methodical. Jessica had been conducting corporate espionage on her own boyfriend, stealing months of work to hand over to Tyler Brooks. The key I'd given her wasn't just access to my office space, it was access to my entire future, and she'd used it to rob me blind. The worst part wasn't even the theft itself, though that was devastating enough. It was the calculated nature of it all. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment betrayal or a moment of weakness. Jessica had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Every time she'd encouraged me to explain my software design, every time she'd asked seemingly innocent questions about my target market, every time she'd suggested new features, she'd been gathering intelligence to help Tyler build a competing product. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent coding while she studied nearby, how supported and loved I'd felt having her there. The whole time, she'd been planning to steal everything I was working for and hand it to another man. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jessica. "Miss you. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. We should grab lunch and you can tell me how the project is going." The casual manipulation in that message made me feel sick. She was going to sit across from me at lunch tomorrow, look me in the eyes, and pretend to care about my work, while knowing she'd already stolen it all. She'd probably ask me innocent-sounding questions designed to gather even more information, to help Tyler's competing project. I needed to see Tyler's social media accounts, to understand what he might be planning with my stolen information. His Instagram was exactly what I'd expected. Photos from expensive restaurants, shots of his BMW, pictures from networking events where he posed with local business leaders. But it was his recent LinkedIn activity that made my blood run cold. 3 days ago, Tyler had posted about his exciting new venture in the IT consulting space, and mentioned he was developing proprietary software solutions for small businesses. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. He was already positioning himself as an innovator in my exact field, using my stolen work to build credibility before he'd even launched anything. The comments on his LinkedIn post were filled with congratulations from classmates, professors, and family connections. Several people mentioned how impressed they were that Tyler was branching out from his family's automotive business into tech. A few local business leaders had even offered to discuss potential partnerships or investments. Tyler was using his existing network and family reputation to create opportunities that had taken me months to develop through careful research and relationship building. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. While I'd been quietly working on my software and slowly building my client base, Tyler had been planning to leapfrog all of that effort by stealing my work and leveraging his connections to bring it to market faster than I could. I realized that Jessica hadn't just betrayed me personally. She'd potentially destroyed months of work and planning. If Tyler could launch a competing product using my stolen designs and his superior networking connections, he could capture market share that I'd been counting on. My software was good, maybe even revolutionary for small IT consulting firms. But in business, being first to market with the right connections often mattered more than having the best product. The rain continued to pound against my apartment windows as I sat there processing the full scope of what had happened. Jessica, the woman I'd thought I wanted to marry, had systematically stolen my work to help another man succeed. Tyler, who'd never shown any interest in IT consulting before, was now positioning himself as an innovator in my field using my stolen intellectual property. But as devastating as this betrayal felt, a part of me was almost grateful that I'd discovered it now, rather than after Jessica and I had gotten even more serious. What if I'd proposed to her? What if we'd started planning a life together while she was secretly working to undermine everything I was building? The thought of how much worse this could have gotten made me shudder. I needed a plan. Confronting Jessica directly might feel satisfying, but it would also tip them off that I knew about their scheme. If I was going to protect my work and my future, I needed to be strategic about how I handled this situation. Tyler and Jessica thought they were dealing with just another broke college student who wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against their theft. They had no idea that behind my modest lifestyle and part-time jobs was a family business worth millions, connections throughout the Portland business community, and access to legal and technical resources that could shut down their little scheme before it ever got started. Jessica had given Tyler the key to what she thought was our future, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated exactly what kind of future she was stealing from. I spent the next morning strategically planning my response while maintaining the facade that nothing had changed. Jessica texted me bright and early, suggesting we meet for lunch at our usual spot on campus. Her message was filled with heart, emojis and mentions of how excited she was to hear about my latest progress on the software project. The audacity of her performance was almost impressive. Rather than confronting her immediately, I decided to gather more intelligence about their operation. I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went and what Tyler was planning to do with my stolen work. I arrived at our lunch spot 15 minutes early and chose a table where I could observe Jessica's behavior without seeming suspicious. When she walked in, she looked radiant in a way that made my stomach turn. She was wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before. Designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I made in a week at my campus jobs. Her hair was styled differently too, more polished and professional. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who was preparing for a significant life change. She greeted me with her usual enthusiasm, sliding into the seat across from me and immediately launching into questions about my project. But now that I knew what to look for, her inquiries felt uncomfortably targeted. She asked specific questions about my client acquisition strategy, my pricing model, and most tellingly, my timeline for launching the software commercially. "You know," she said, stirring her coffee with deliberate casualness, "I've been thinking about your target market. Research. Have you considered reaching out to some of the bigger consulting firms in Portland? Maybe they'd be interested in beta testing your software before you launch it to smaller companies." The suggestion was actually brilliant from a business perspective, which made it even more infuriating. Jessica was using genuine marketing insights to help me improve my product, while simultaneously stealing that same product for Tyler. She was literally helping me build something better so that Tyler could steal a more refined version. "That's an interesting idea," I replied, watching her carefully. "Have you mentioned this project to anyone else? I want to make sure I'm being careful about intellectual property protection." Something flickered across her face, so quickly I almost missed it. "Of course not," she said, perhaps a beat too fast. "This is your work, your future. I would never share your ideas with anyone else." The lie came so smoothly that I wondered how many other lies I'd believed over the past 2 years. How many times had Jessica sat across from me, looked into my eyes, and told me exactly what I wanted to hear while planning something completely different behind my back. After lunch, I walked Jessica back toward her dorm, then made an excuse about needing to check something at the campus computer lab. Instead, I circled back toward downtown Portland, toward Tyler's neighborhood. I needed to see what he was up to, and more importantly, I needed to understand the scope of whatever operation they were running. Tyler lived in the Pearl District, one of Portland's most expensive neighborhoods, in a converted warehouse loft that his father had purchased as an investment property. The building was the kind of place where young professionals with family money lived while they figured out their next move. As I approached the building, I spotted Tyler's BMW parked in the underground garage through the glass entrance. Rather than lurking outside like some kind of stalker, I decided to visit the coffee shop across the street, a trendy place where I could sit with my laptop and observe Tyler's building while appearing to work on schoolwork. I ordered a drink and settled into a corner table with a clear view of the building's main entrance. Within an hour, my patience paid off. Tyler emerged from the building carrying what looked like a presentation folder and headed toward his car. But instead of driving away immediately, he made a phone call that lasted nearly 10 minutes. Even from across the street, I could see his animated gestures and intense focus. This wasn't a casual conversation. When Tyler finally drove away, I made a decision that would have seemed completely out of character for the modest college student everyone thought I was. I called my father. "Dad, I need some advice about a business situation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on, son?" Dad's voice immediately shifted into the focused tone he used when discussing serious business matters. I explained the situation carefully, leaving out the personal details about Jessica, but focusing on the intellectual property theft and Tyler's apparent plan to use stolen work to launch a competing business. Dad listened without interrupting, occasionally asking pointed questions about technical specifics and timeline details. "How certain are you about the scope of what was stolen?" Dad asked when I finished. "Very certain. I have access logs showing exactly what files were downloaded and when." "They have everything, Dad. The business plan, the technical specifications, months of development work." There was a long pause before Dad spoke again. "Ryan, I think it's time we had a conversation about accelerating your timeline with Mitchell Tech. What would you say to officially joining the company immediately rather than waiting until after graduation?" The offer was tempting, but I knew that joining the family business right now would feel like running away from the problem rather than solving it. "I appreciate that, Dad, but I want to handle this situation first. I need to protect the work I've already done and make sure these people face consequences for what they've stolen." "All right," Dad said, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "Then let's talk about resources. You have access to the company's legal team, our investigative contacts, and our technology resources. How do you want to proceed?" That conversation changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just a betrayed college student trying to figure out how to respond to theft and infidelity. I was a member of the Mitchell family with access to resources that Tyler and Jessica couldn't even imagine. My first call was to Sarah Chen, Mitchell Tech's head of legal affairs. Sarah had been with the company for 8 years and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting intellectual property. When I explained the situation, her response was immediate and reassuring. "We can have a cease and desist letter ready within 24 hours, Sarah said. "But more importantly, we can start building a case for criminal charges if they actually attempt to use your stolen work commercially. Industrial espionage is a serious crime, especially when it involves proprietary software and business plans. I want to be strategic about this," I told her. "These people think they're dealing with someone who doesn't have resources to fight back. I'd like to let them dig themselves in deeper before we reveal what they're actually up against." Sarah's laugh was sharp and approving. "I like the way you think. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. We'll monitor the situation and be ready to move when you give the word." My next call was to Marcus Williams, Mitchell Tech's head of cybersecurity. Marcus had worked for the FBI's cybercrime division before joining the company, and he had skills that went far beyond typical corporate IT security. "I can set up monitoring on your stolen accounts to see exactly how they're using your intellectual property," Marcus explained. "If they're foolish enough to use your stolen code or business plans directly, we'll have documentation of every instance. More importantly, I can ensure that they don't gain access to anything beyond what they've already stolen." Within hours, I had a team of professionals working to protect my interests while I maintained the appearance of being an oblivious college student. It was a strange feeling, having this level of support while pretending to be powerless. That evening, Jessica texted me asking if I wanted to grab dinner together. I agreed, curious to see if her behavior would give away any additional information about their plans. We met at a casual restaurant near campus, the kind of place we'd gone dozens of times over the past 2 years. But something was different about Jessica that night. She seemed distracted, frequently checking her phone and occasionally losing track of our conversation. When I asked her about her day, she gave vague answers about studying and working on group projects. Every response felt rehearsed, like she'd prepared answers for questions she expected me to ask. "You seem stressed lately," I observed, genuinely curious about her state of mind. "Is everything okay with your classes?" "Oh, you know how senior year is," she replied, waving dismissively. "Just a lot of pressure to figure out what comes next after graduation." "Have you given any more thought to what you want to do after we graduate?" I asked. "We've talked about maybe moving in together, starting our careers in the same city." The question clearly made her uncomfortable. She shifted in her seat and took a long sip of her wine before answering. "I think we should keep our options open," she said finally. "There might be opportunities that come up that we haven't considered yet." The evasiveness of her answer confirmed what I already suspected. Jessica was already planning a future that didn't include me. Probably a future that involved Tyler and whatever success they expected to achieve with my stolen work. "What kind of opportunities?" I pressed, genuinely curious about how far she was willing to take her deception. Just, networking opportunities, potential job offers, that sort of thing, she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. I don't want to get too locked into specific plans when there might be amazing chances that come up. I nodded, as if her answer made perfect sense. But internally, I was marveling at her ability to lie so convincingly while sitting across from someone she claimed to love. Jessica wasn't just stealing my work and betraying our relationship. She was actively planning to abandon me while pretending that our future together was still a possibility. After dinner, Jessica claimed she needed to head back to her dorm to work on a project that was due the next day. I walked her to her building, kissed her goodnight like nothing had changed, and watched her disappear into the lobby. Then I walked to my car and drove toward downtown Portland. I had a key to my office space, and I wanted to see if there was any evidence that Tyler had already been there using the key Jessica had given him. The building was mostly empty at night, occupied mainly by young startups and freelancers who kept irregular hours. I took the elevator to the third floor, where my office was located among a cluster of other small business suites. As I approached my office door, I immediately noticed something wrong. The door was slightly ajar, though I was certain I'd locked it when I left yesterday. I pushed it open carefully and stepped inside, my heart pounding as I surveyed the space. Someone had definitely been there. My desk had been searched, with papers moved around and drawers left slightly open. My desktop computer was still running, though I always shut it down when I left. Most telling of all, there were coffee cups in my trash can, the kind sold at the expensive coffee shop in Tyler's neighborhood. I sat down at my computer and checked the access logs for the local network. Sure enough, someone had logged into my development server from this location earlier that afternoon, using Jessica's credentials to access files that hadn't been downloaded previously. They were being systematic about their theft, making sure they had copies of everything I'd created. But as I dug deeper into the logs, I discovered something that made me smile grimly. Marcus Williams had been busy. Hidden among the normal access logs were traces of the monitoring software he'd installed. Every file Tyler had accessed, every piece of code he'd viewed, every document he'd downloaded was being recorded and time-stamped. More importantly, Marcus had installed tracking software that would alert us if Tyler tried to use any of my stolen code in his own projects. If Tyler was stupid enough to copy and paste my work directly, we'd have immediate proof of theft that would hold up in any court. I spent another hour in my office, carefully documenting everything that had been disturbed and taking photos of evidence that Tyler and Jessica had been there. Then I did something that would have seemed paranoid a week ago but now felt entirely reasonable. I installed a hidden security camera system that would record anyone who entered my office without permission. The next morning brought a text message from Jessica that made my jaw drop. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee before class, and when I agreed, she suggested we meet at the Grind, the same place where I'd seen her giving Tyler my key 2 nights earlier. The sheer audacity of the suggestion was breathtaking. I arrived at the coffee shop early and chose the same table where Tyler and Jessica had been sitting. When Jessica walked in, she greeted me with her usual bright smile and settled into the chair where Tyler had been sitting when she'd handed over my key. "I've been thinking more about your software project," she said, pulling out a notebook. "I had some ideas about potential marketing strategies that might help you reach a wider audience." For the next 30 minutes, Jessica laid out a detailed marketing plan for my software that was genuinely impressive. She'd clearly put significant thought and research into understanding my target market, identifying key selling points, and developing strategies for customer acquisition. Under different circumstances, I would have been grateful for her insight and impressed by her business acumen. But knowing what I knew, her presentation felt like a twisted form of torture. Jessica was essentially helping me improve my product so that Tyler could steal a better version of it. She was using her genuine marketing skills to help me build something more valuable for them to take. "This is really thoughtful," I said when she finished her presentation. "You've put a lot of work into this." "I care about your success," she replied, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I want to see you achieve everything you're working toward." The words were probably true in some twisted way. Jessica probably did want to see me succeed, right up until the moment when Tyler launched his competing product using my stolen work. She wanted me to build something valuable so they could take it, but she probably convinced herself that she was being supportive rather than predatory. That afternoon, I received a call from Marcus Williams with an update that changed everything. "They're moving faster than we expected," Marcus told me. "Tyler Brooks filed for a business license yesterday under the name Brooks Consulting Solutions. He's also applied for a trademark on software called Consult Pro that uses language lifted directly from your business plan." The news hit me like a physical blow. Tyler wasn't just planning to steal my work, he was already actively building a business around it. The trademark application was particularly bold, since it meant he was planning to claim legal ownership of concepts that I had developed. "How close is he to actually launching?" I asked. "Based on what we're seeing, probably within the next 2 weeks," Marcus replied. "He's scheduled meetings with several potential investors, including some of his father's business contacts. It looks like he's planning to use family connections to secure funding for a business built on your stolen intellectual property." The timeline was more aggressive than I'd expected, which meant I needed to accelerate my own plans. Tyler and Jessica had probably assumed that even if I discovered their theft, I wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to stop them quickly enough to prevent their launch. They were betting that I'd be forced to watch helplessly while they turned my work into their success. They were about to learn that they'd made a serious miscalculation about who they were dealing with. That evening, I called my father and told him it was time to move from defense to offense. The conversation that followed would set in motion a series of events that would completely destroy Tyler and Jessica's plans while teaching them a lesson about the consequences of betraying trust. But first, I had one more performance to give. Jessica had invited me to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown, claiming she wanted to celebrate our relationship and discuss our future together. Given what I now knew about her real plans, the invitation felt like a final insult, but it also presented an opportunity. I was going to let Jessica tell me all about our wonderful future together, right before I showed her exactly what kind of future she'd actually chosen. The restaurant Jessica chose for our dinner was an upscale place in the Pearl District, just a few blocks from Tyler's apartment building. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was using what was supposed to be a romantic evening to conduct what felt increasingly like reconnaissance for their operation. As I sat across from her in the dimly lit booth, watching her order the most expensive wine on the menu, I realized this dinner was probably being funded by money from Tyler's family. Connections. Jessica looked stunning that evening, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, and jewelry that definitely hadn't come from her usual budget-conscious shopping trips. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who was already living a more affluent lifestyle than her student loans and part-time retail job should have allowed. "I wanted tonight to be special," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "We've been together for almost 2 years, and I feel like we're at this amazing crossroads where anything is possible." The word crossroads felt particularly loaded, coming from someone who was actively planning to abandon our relationship for another man. I clinked my glass against hers and smiled, playing my part in whatever performance she was staging. "You seem different lately," I observed, genuinely curious about her psychological state. "More confident, maybe? Like you're excited about something." Jessica's eyes lit up in a way that made my stomach turn. "I am excited," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what I want from life, what kind of future I want to build." "Tell me about it," I encouraged, fascinated by her ability to discuss our future while actively planning my betrayal. For the next hour, Jessica painted an elaborate picture of the life she envisioned after graduation. She talked about moving to a bigger city, maybe Seattle or San Francisco, where there would be more opportunities for ambitious young professionals. She described wanting to work for a cutting-edge company, something in the tech sector where she could apply her marketing skills to innovative products. "I think the key is finding the right partners," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "People who share your vision and have the resources to make big things happen." The conversation felt surreal, like listening to someone describe a movie plot in which I was supposed to be the main character, except they'd already decided to replace me with someone else. Jessica was describing a future that sounded exactly like what Tyler could offer her, using my stolen work as the foundation for their success. "What about us?" I asked directly. "How do you see our relationship fitting into these big plans?" The question clearly made her uncomfortable. She took a long sip of wine and glanced around the restaurant before answering. I think we need to be realistic about what's possible, she said finally. Long-distance relationships are hard, and we both need to focus on building our careers. The words hit me like a slap, not because they were unexpected, but because of how casually she delivered them. Jessica was essentially breaking up with me while pretending we were having a romantic dinner to celebrate our relationship. The level of manipulation was breathtaking. Are you saying you want to break up? I asked, genuinely curious about how far she would take the deception. I'm saying we should keep our options open, she replied, using almost the exact same words she'd used the night before. Maybe we're limiting ourselves by being so focused on building a future together when there might be better opportunities if we're both free to pursue whatever comes up. I nodded as if her reasoning made sense, but internally I was marveling at her ability to reframe betrayal as liberation. Jessica had managed to convince herself that abandoning me for Tyler was actually a favor she was doing for both of us. Have you already identified some of these opportunities? I pressed, wondering if she would admit to anything specific about Tyler. Maybe, she said with a mysterious smile. I've been networking more lately, meeting people who are doing interesting things in the business world. There's this one guy who's launching a really innovative consulting company. He's got incredible vision and the family connections to make it successful. The casual way she described Tyler as this one guy, while wearing jewelry he'd probably bought her, was almost impressive in its audacity. Jessica was sitting across from me, using my money to pay for dinner, while openly discussing the man she was leaving me for. That sounds promising, I said. What kind of consulting company? IT consulting, actually, she replied, apparently not seeing any irony in the fact that she was describing my own field. He's developing some revolutionary software that could change how small consulting firms operate. The description of my own stolen work being presented as Tyler's innovation was the final straw. I'd been planning to maintain my facade through the end of dinner, but Jessica's casual theft of my intellectual property while describing it as another man's brilliance was more than I could stomach. That's interesting, I said carefully. I'm working on something similar myself. Maybe I should meet this guy, compare notes about the market. Something flickered across Jessica's face, a moment of panic that she quickly covered with a bright smile. Oh, I don't think that would be a good idea, she said quickly. He's very protective of his intellectual property, very secretive about his development process. The irony of Jessica describing Tyler as protective of intellectual property, while she was actively stealing mine for him, was so perfect that I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I nodded understandingly and changed the subject. After dinner, Jessica suggested we take a walk through the Pearl District. As we strolled past Tyler's building, she casually mentioned that she had a friend who lived in the area and might want to stop by to say hello. The suggestion was so transparent that I wondered if she thought I was completely oblivious to what was happening. Actually, I should probably head home, I said. I've got an early morning tomorrow, and I want to make some progress on my software project. Jessica's face fell slightly, as if she'd been counting on introducing me to Tyler that evening. Are you sure? She asked. My friend would love to meet you. He's really interested in tech entrepreneurship. Maybe another time, I replied, kissing her goodnight and watching as she walked toward Tyler's building. I waited until she disappeared into the lobby, then drove home to my apartment, my mind racing with plans for what would happen next. The following morning brought a call from Sarah Chen with news that accelerated my timeline significantly. Tyler Brooks filed papers yesterday to incorporate Brooks Consulting Solutions as a Delaware LLC, Sarah reported. He's also submitted a more detailed trademark application that includes specific features lifted directly from your software documentation. How detailed? I asked. Detailed enough that any competent intellectual property attorney would immediately recognize the theft, Sarah replied. He's essentially trying to trademark your work under his name. It's brazen and stupid, which works in our favor. What's our next move? We file an injunction to stop his trademark application and begin building a case for criminal charges, Sarah said. But I'd recommend we also set a trap to catch him in the act of using your stolen code. If we can document him actually implementing your software architecture, we'll have an airtight case. That afternoon, I received an unexpected text message from Madison Walsh, one of Jessica's closest friends from her marketing program. Madison and I had never been particularly close, but we'd interacted enough at social events that a message from her didn't seem completely out of the blue. "Hey Ryan, can you meet for coffee today? I need to talk to you about something important." The timing felt suspicious, but I was curious about what Madison might know about Jessica's activities. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near campus, a neutral location where we could talk without drawing attention. Madison looked nervous when she arrived, fidgeting with her phone and glancing around the coffee shop as if she expected to be overheard. She was usually one of the most confident people in Jessica's social circle, so her obvious anxiety immediately put me on alert. "I need to tell you something about Jessica," she said without preamble. "But you have to promise not to tell her. It came from me." "What's going on?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Madison took a deep breath and launched into a story that confirmed my worst suspicions while revealing details I hadn't known. According to Madison, Jessica had been seeing Tyler secretly for almost 2 months. What had started as study sessions for a shared business class had evolved into something much more serious. "She's been telling Tyler all about your software project," Madison continued. "She showed him your business plan, your technical documentation, everything. Tyler thinks it's brilliant, and he's convinced Jessica that she deserves to be part of something bigger than what you can offer her." The revelation that this had been going on for 2 months hit me harder than I'd expected. Jessica hadn't just recently decided to betray me. She'd been systematically planning it for half of our senior year. Every conversation we'd had about our future, every time she'd encouraged me to share details about my work, had been part of a long-term strategy to steal everything I was building. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Madison. "Because it's wrong," she replied firmly. "Jessica is my friend, but what she's doing to you is horrible. Tyler has been feeding her all this bullshit about how she's too good for someone who's just a computer repair guy, and she's bought into it completely." The description of me as just a computer repair guy would have been amusing if it wasn't so central to their entire scheme. Tyler and Jessica had built their plan around the assumption that I was exactly what I appeared to be, a working-class student with no resources or connections to fight back against their theft. "There's something else," Madison continued, looking even more uncomfortable. "Tyler's been bragging to people about how easy it was to steal your work. He thinks you're too naive to even realize what's happening, and he's planning to launch his company before you can do anything to stop him." The casual contempt in Tyler's assessment of my intelligence was actually helpful information. If Tyler believed I was too stupid to recognize the theft, he was probably being careless about covering his tracks. Overconfidence had been the downfall of many criminals throughout history. "When is he planning to launch?" I asked. "Next week," Madison replied. "He's got meetings scheduled with investors, including some of his father's business partners. Jessica is supposed to present the marketing strategy, using all the research she did about your target market." The timeline was even more aggressive than I'd realized. Tyler wasn't just planning to steal my work. He was planning to present it to investors as his own original creation within days. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also created an opportunity. "Madison, can you do me a favor?" I asked. "Can you find out when and where these investor meetings are supposed to happen?" "Why?" she asked suspiciously. "Because I want to make sure Tyler gets exactly the kind of attention he deserves for his innovative work," I replied. That evening, I called my father and updated him on the accelerated timeline. The conversation that followed would set in motion the most satisfying sequence of events in my entire life. "Son, I think it's time we reminded these people about the consequences of stealing from the Mitchell family," Dad said with quiet intensity. "How would you like to handle this?" "I want them to succeed," I said, which clearly surprised him. "I want Tyler to get his investor meetings. I want Jessica to present her marketing strategy, and I want them both to feel like they're on the verge of achieving everything they've worked for." "And then?" Dad asked. "And then I want them to meet the real Ryan Mitchell, along with the full resources of Mitchell Tech Solutions," I replied. "I want their moment of triumph to become the most humiliating experience of their lives." Dad's laugh was warm and approving. "I'll make some calls. By tomorrow morning, we'll know everything about Tyler's investor meetings, and we'll be ready to give him a reception he'll never forget." The next few days passed in a strange suspension of reality. Jessica continued to text me regularly, maintaining the pretense of our relationship while presumably finalizing her plans with Tyler. She even suggested we spend the weekend together, perhaps as a final gesture before officially ending things. Meanwhile, I received regular updates from Marcus Williams about Tyler's activities. He was working frantically to prepare for his investor presentations, using my stolen code and business documentation to build what he clearly believed would be his ticket to entrepreneurial success. The irony was that Tyler was actually doing good work with my stolen materials. He was an effective presenter and had genuine business instincts, which made his theft even more infuriating. Under different circumstances, Tyler might have been successful in the consulting industry through his own efforts and family connections, but Tyler had chosen to build his success on stolen foundations, and that choice was about to destroy not just his business prospects, but his entire reputation in Portland's tight-knit business community. On Thursday afternoon, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Sarah Chen had all the details about Tyler's investor meetings, including the names of attendees, the location, and the specific presentations he was planning to give. "The meeting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the conference room at Brooks Automotive headquarters," Sarah reported. "Tyler's father will be there, along with 3 potential investors and 2 family friends who work in venture capital." "Perfect," I said. "I think it's time for Tyler Brooks to meet the competition." That evening, Jessica called to cancel our weekend plans, claiming she had an important family obligation that had come up suddenly. The lie was so transparent that I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered that she'd been lying to me for months while stealing my life's work. "I'm really sorry about this," she said, her voice full of fake regret. "But I promise I'll make it up to you next week. Maybe we can plan something really special." "Don't worry about it," I replied cheerfully. "I'm sure you'll have plenty to celebrate next week." The comment clearly confused her, but I hung up before she could ask for clarification. By this time tomorrow, Jessica would understand exactly what I'd meant. I spent Friday morning in final preparation for what would be the most important business meeting of my life. I put on my best suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews but had never actually needed to wear. I gathered printed copies of all my original work, including timestamps and documentation that would prove the timeline of my development process. Most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for the moment when Tyler Brooks would discover that the naive college student he'd been stealing from was actually the heir to one of Portland's most successful IT consulting firms. At 1:30 p.m., I drove to Brooks Automotive headquarters, a gleaming glass building in one of Portland's most prestigious business districts. As I walked through the lobby toward the conference room where Tyler was about to present my stolen work to his father and potential investors, I felt a calm confidence that came from knowing I held all the cards. Tyler Brooks had spent months planning to steal my future and claim it as his own. In about 30 minutes, he was going to learn that some futures are more dangerous to steal than others. The Brooks Automotive Building's 23rd floor conference room was everything I'd expected from a successful family business. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Portland, and the mahogany table could easily seat 20 people. When I stepped off the elevator, I could hear Tyler's voice through the partially open conference room door, already deep into his presentation. I approached the reception desk, where a professional-looking woman was reviewing what appeared to be meeting schedules. "Excuse me," I said politely. "I'm here for the Brooks Consulting Solutions investor presentation. I believe I'm expected." The receptionist looked confused as she scanned her list. "I don't see your name on the attendee list. May I ask who you're with?" "Mitchell Tech Solutions," I replied, handing her my business card. "We're competitors in the IT consulting space, and I believe there may be some intellectual property concerns that need to be addressed before any investments are finalized." Her eyes widened as she recognized the Mitchell Tech name. Our company had serviced Brooks Automotive's IT infrastructure for over a decade, which meant my family name carried significant weight in this building. She immediately picked up her phone and made a quiet call, presumably to someone with authority to handle unexpected complications. Within moments, Richard Brooks himself emerged from the conference room, his face showing a mixture of confusion and concern. Richard was a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd built a successful business empire. He'd known my father professionally for years, though we'd never been formally introduced. "Ryan Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "This is unexpected. I wasn't aware that Mitchell Tech had any interest in today's presentation." "Neither was your son," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "But I believe he's presenting some work that belongs to my company." and I thought it would be appropriate to address that before any business relationships are established. Richard's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. As a successful businessman, he immediately understood the implications of what I was suggesting. Intellectual property theft could destroy not just a startup venture but the reputation of everyone associated with it. "Perhaps you should join us inside," he said carefully. "I think we need to get to the bottom of this immediately." As we walked toward the conference room, I could hear Tyler's voice growing more animated as he described the revolutionary features of his software platform. He was clearly in his element, presenting to a room full of potential investors and family connections who were impressed by his apparent innovation. When Richard opened the conference room door, Tyler's voice faltered mid-sentence. He was standing at the head of the table with a PowerPoint presentation displayed on the wall-mounted screen. The slide he was presenting showed architecture diagrams that I recognized immediately as my own work, complete with specific technical details that I'd spent months developing. The other attendees turned to look at us as we entered. I recognized two of the men as prominent venture capitalists who'd been featured in local business publications. The third investor was someone I didn't know, but his expensive suit and confident demeanor suggested he had significant financial resources. "Tyler," Richard said, his voice carefully controlled, "I'd like you to meet Ryan Mitchell from Mitchell Tech Solutions. He has some concerns about today's presentation that I think we need to address." Tyler's face went through a fascinating sequence of emotions. Initial confusion gave way to recognition, then panic, and finally a forced attempt at composure. He clearly hadn't expected to see me in this context, and he was struggling to understand how I'd gained access to his private investor meeting. "Ryan," Tyler said, his voice tight with barely controlled tension, "this is unexpected. I wasn't aware you had any involvement with Brooks Automotive." "I don't," I replied pleasantly, "but I do have involvement with the intellectual property you're currently presenting as your own original work." The silence that followed was deafening. The investors exchanged glances while Richard Brooks looked like a man who was beginning to understand that his son had created a serious problem for the family business. "I'm sorry," said one of the venture capitalists, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd built her reputation on careful due diligence. "Are you suggesting that Mr. Brooks is presenting stolen intellectual property?" "I'm not suggesting it," I replied, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the conference room's display system. "I'm documenting it." For the next 10 minutes, I systematically demonstrated the theft that Tyler had committed. I showed the original timestamps on my code, the development history that proved I'd been working on this project for over 8 months, and most damaging of all, the access logs that documented exactly when and how Tyler had gained unauthorized access to my intellectual property. Tyler tried to interrupt several times, claiming that he'd developed his software independently and that any similarities were coincidental. But when I displayed side-by-side comparisons of his stolen code with my original work, including comments and variable names that were identical, his protests became increasingly desperate and unconvincing. The most devastating moment came when I showed the group Tyler's trademark application, which had lifted entire paragraphs from my business plan word for word. The legal documents he'd submitted to claim ownership of my work were so obviously plagiarized that even someone without technical knowledge could see the theft. "This is impossible," Tyler said, his voice cracking with desperation. "Ryan is just a college student. He works part-time jobs fixing computers. There's no way he could have developed something this sophisticated." The comment revealed exactly how thoroughly Tyler had misunderstood the situation he'd gotten himself into. Richard Brooks looked at his son with a mixture of disappointment and horror as he began to realize the scope of Tyler's deception. "Tyler," Richard said quietly, "Ryan's father owns Mitchell Tech Solutions. They've been our IT consultants for over a decade. The Mitchell family has built one of the most successful technology companies in the Pacific Northwest." The revelation hit Tyler like a physical blow. His face drained of color as he finally understood that he hadn't been stealing from a powerless college student, but from the heir to a technology empire with the resources to destroy him both legally and professionally. "But Jessica said," Tyler began, then stopped himself as he realized that finishing that sentence would only make things worse. "Jessica said what?" I asked, genuinely curious about how deeply my ex-girlfriend was involved in their scheme. Tyler looked around. the room desperately, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. She said you were just working on a small student project. She said you didn't have the resources or connections to make it commercially viable. Jessica was misinformed about a lot of things, I replied, including the nature of our relationship, apparently. Patricia Chen leaned forward with the intensity of someone who'd built her career on identifying fraudulent business proposals. Mr. Brooks, do you have any documentation to support your claim that you developed this software independently? Tyler's silence was answer enough. He'd been so confident in his theft that he hadn't bothered to create any cover story beyond the assumption that I wouldn't be able to challenge him. Richard Brooks stood up from his chair, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Gentlemen, ladies, I apologize for wasting your time today. This meeting is over. As the investors gathered their materials and prepared to leave, I could see them exchanging knowing looks. Word of Tyler's attempted fraud would spread through Portland's business community within hours, effectively ending any future prospects he might have had in the local startup scene. Wait, Tyler said desperately. We can work something out. Ryan, surely we can reach some kind of agreement. I looked at Tyler for a long moment, considering his desperation. Here was someone who'd spent months planning to steal my work and claim it as his own, who'd seduced my girlfriend to gain access to my intellectual property, and who'd been bragging to people about how easy it was to fool me. Now, he was begging for mercy. Tyler, I said finally, 3 days ago you filed trademark applications trying to claim legal ownership of my work. Yesterday you were telling investors that you were the innovative genius behind software that I spent 8 months developing. This morning you probably thought you were about to become a successful entrepreneur using my stolen ideas. Tyler's face was a mask of panic as he realized I was building towards something that wasn't going to involve the kind of mercy he was hoping for. The problem is, I continued, you didn't just steal from me. You stole from Mitchell Tech Solutions, which means you stole from a company with legal resources that most people can't even imagine. You've committed federal crimes related to intellectual property theft, computer fraud, and attempted trademark fraud. Please, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll drop the trademark applications. I'll delete everything. We can pretend this never happened. Actually, I replied, we can't. Because while you were planning to steal my future, I was documenting every aspect of your theft. My lawyers have been building a case against you for days, and frankly, you've made their job incredibly easy. Richard Brooks looked at his son with disgust. Tyler, do you understand what you've done? You've potentially destroyed relationships that took decades to build. Mitchell Tech has been a trusted partner of this company for years. I'm sorry, Dad, Tyler said, tears starting to form in his eyes. I thought this was my chance to prove myself, to build something impressive. By stealing it from someone else? Richard snapped. By committing crimes that could send you to federal prison? The mention of federal prison seemed to break something inside Tyler. He slumped into his chair, finally understanding that his schemes had consequences far beyond anything he'd imagined. But I wasn't finished yet. There was still the matter of Jessica's role in all this, and I wanted Tyler to understand exactly how thoroughly his co-conspirator had manipulated the situation. Tyler, I said, there's something else you should know about Jessica. She's been playing both sides of this situation from the beginning. Tyler looked up at me with confusion. What do you mean? I mean that while she was helping you steal my work, she was also pumping me for additional information to make your theft more complete. She was literally helping me improve my software so you could steal a better version of it. The realization that Jessica had been manipulating him, as much as she'd been manipulating me, seemed to hit Tyler harder than the legal consequences he was facing. He'd convinced himself that Jessica genuinely cared about him, that their relationship was real, even if it was built on betraying me. She told me she loved me, Tyler said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. She told me the same thing, I replied. Right up until the moment she handed you the key to my office so you could steal everything I'd worked for. The room fell silent as Tyler processed the full scope of how thoroughly he'd been used by someone he'd trusted. It was almost enough to make me feel sorry for him, but then I remembered the months of systematic theft and the casual contempt he'd shown for what he thought was my powerlessness. Patricia Chen stood up to leave, but before she reached the deuter, she turned back to address the room. Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that word of this will spread through the investment community. What Mr. Brooks attempted today was unconscionable, and people need to know about it. I appreciate that, I replied. Intellectual property theft is a serious crime, and entrepreneurs who build their businesses on stolen work need to face consequences. As the investors filed out of the conference room, Tyler remained slumped in his chair, staring at the table as if he could somehow make the last hour disappear. Richard Brooks stood by the window, looking out at the Portland skyline while clearly contemplating the damage his son had done to the family's reputation. But the day wasn't over yet. I still had one more surprise in store. One that would ensure Tyler and Jessica both understood exactly what they'd lost when they decided to betray my trust. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message. Conference room 2315, Brooks Automotive Building, come alone. Within 30 minutes, Jessica would be walking into a room where she'd discover that her carefully planned betrayal had completely backfired and that the poor college student she'd abandoned for a rich entrepreneur was actually everything she'd been looking for all along. Jessica arrived at the Brooks Automotive Building 37 minutes after I sent the text, her face flushed with excitement as she stepped off the elevator. She was dressed in what looked like a celebration outfit, probably expecting to toast Tyler's successful investor presentation and their bright future together. When she walked into the conference room and saw Tyler slumped in his chair with his father standing grimly by the window, her expression shifted to confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between Tyler and me with growing alarm. "Tyler, how did the presentation go? Why does everyone look so serious?" "Sit down, Jessica," I said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from where Tyler sat. "We need to talk about your role in stealing my intellectual property." The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling. She looked at Tyler desperately, as if expecting him to somehow rescue the situation, but Tyler couldn't even meet her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jessica said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I would never steal anything from you." I opened my laptop and pulled up the access logs that Marcus Williams had compiled. These records show every file you downloaded from my development server over the past 3 weeks. Business plans, source code, technical documentation, client research. Everything Tyler needed to build his fraudulent company. Jessica stared at the screen, watching timestamps and file names scroll past that documented her systematic theft. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "You don't understand. Tyler and we weren't trying to hurt you. We were going to make you an offer to buy your software." The lie was so transparent that even Tyler looked up from his contemplation of failure to stare at her in disbelief. Richard Brooks shook his head slowly, clearly disgusted by the continued deception. "Jessica," I said patiently, "Tyler filed trademark applications trying to claim legal ownership of my work. He incorporated a company using my stolen business plan. He was presenting my software to investors as his own original creation. That's not buying intellectual property, that's stealing it." "But you're just a college student," Jessica protested, her voice rising with desperation. "You work part-time jobs. You don't have the resources to commercialize software like this. Tyler has connections, family money, real business experience." The comment revealed exactly how little Jessica had understood about the situation she'd involved herself in. She'd been so focused on Tyler's apparent wealth and connections that she'd never bothered to investigate what she was actually stealing from me. "Jessica," I said, standing up and walking to the window where Richard Brooks stood. "I'd like you to meet Richard Brooks, Tyler's father and owner of Brooks Automotive. Mr. Brooks, would you mind telling Jessica about your relationship with my family's company?" Richard turned from the window, his expression stern. "Mitchell, Tech Solutions has been our IT consulting partner for over 12 years. Ryan's father built one of the most successful technology companies in the Pacific Northwest. The Mitchell family has resources and connections that make Tyler's trust fund look like lunch money." Jessica's face went through the same sequence of emotions I'd watched Tyler experience an hour earlier. Confusion, recognition, panic, and finally a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her schemes. "Ryan," she said, her voice taking on the pleading tone she'd probably used to manipulate other people throughout her life. I made a mistake. I got confused about what was best for our future. But we can fix this. We can be together and build something amazing with your software. The audacity of her suggestion was breathtaking. Jessica was literally asking me to forgive her for stealing my life's work and betraying our relationship so that she could benefit from the success she'd tried to hand to another man. Our future? I repeated. Jessica, you gave Tyler the key to my office so he could steal my work. You downloaded months of development and research to help him build a competing company. You were planning to present my marketing research to his investors as your own work. What part of that sounds like building a future together? Jessica looked around the room desperately, as if searching for someone who might support her version of events. Tyler remained slumped in his chair, staring at his hands. Richard Brooks watched the proceedings with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly instructive business failure. I was trying to help you, Jessica insisted, though even she didn't sound convinced by her own words. Tyler has connections you don't have. If we'd partnered with him, your software could have reached a much bigger market. By letting him claim ownership of my work and cutting me out of the profits? I asked. Jessica, that's not partnership. That's fraud. The word fraud seemed to break something inside Jessica. She began crying, not the gentle tears of someone genuinely remorseful, but the angry sobs of someone who'd been caught in a scheme that had backfired spectacularly. This isn't fair, she said between sobs. You let me think you were poor. You let me believe Tyler was the better choice. If I'd known you were rich, I never would have done this. Her words revealed everything I'd suspected about her character. Jessica wasn't sorry for betraying me or stealing my work. She was sorry for making the wrong calculation about which man could provide her with a better lifestyle. You're right, I said calmly. If you'd known about my family's wealth, you probably would have stayed with me and found some other way to betray my trust. But you would have been betraying me for the same reasons, just with different methods. Tyler finally looked up from his contemplation. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now you both learn about consequences, I replied. Tyler, you've committed federal crimes related to intellectual property theft and fraud. My lawyers will be filing charges that could result in prison time and financial penalties that will bankrupt you for decades. Tyler nodded miserably, finally understanding that his actions had destroyed not just his business prospects, but potentially his freedom. Jessica, I continued, you've been an accessory to Tyler's crimes. You systematically stole intellectual property with the intent to help someone else profit from it. That makes you criminally liable for conspiracy and theft. But I didn't know it was illegal, Jessica protested weakly. Ignorance isn't a defense for criminal behavior, Richard Brooks interjected. And frankly, any reasonable person would understand that stealing someone's work and giving it to a competitor is wrong. I gathered my materials and prepared to leave the conference room where Tyler and Jessica's schemes had collapsed so thoroughly. There's one more thing you should both understand, I said, pausing at the door. This isn't about revenge or punishment. This is about protecting intellectual property and ensuring that people who build businesses on stolen work face appropriate consequences. As I walked toward the elevator, I could hear Jessica still crying behind me, probably beginning to understand that her choice to betray me for Tyler had cost her everything she'd thought she was gaining. Tyler would face criminal charges and financial ruin. Jessica would face legal consequences and the knowledge that she'd destroyed a genuine relationship for a fantasy built on stolen work. 6 months later, Tyler pleaded guilty to intellectual property theft and received 2 years of federal probation, along with financial penalties that forced him to sell his BMW and move back in with his parents. Jessica was charged as an accessory and received community service along with a criminal record that effectively ended her marketing career before it started. My software launched successfully through Mitchell Tech Solutions and became exactly the industry-changing product I'd envisioned. The attempted theft had actually helped me refine the business model and strengthen the intellectual property protections. As for Jessica and Tyler, they learned that some keys open doors to futures that are more dangerous to steal than they initially appear. When someone gives you the key to their future, the wise choice is to treasure that trust rather than use it to steal everything they've worked to build. Sometimes the greatest betrayals teach the most valuable lessons about the kind of people worth trusting with the keys to your life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.